I stood in my driveway at 3 in the morning watching flames consume my two-story colonial home in suburban Pennsylvania. The orange glow painted everything in hellish colors, while thick black smoke billowed into the star-filled sky. Fire trucks hadn't arrived yet, though I could hear sirens wailing in the distance. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from neighbors offering help, spare rooms, anything I needed. But the first call I made was to my parents, Sandra and Robert. When my mother answered on the fourth ring, instead of the concern any normal parent would show, I heard something that chilled me more than the November air. Laughter. Pure, delighted laughter. Finally, karma torched the trash, she said, while my father chuckled in the background like I'd just told them the funniest joke they'd ever heard. As the sirens grew louder and my life literally went up in smoke, I realized my family's cruelty ran deeper than I ever imagined. The fire department had packed up and left by 8 in the morning. I sat on the curb across from what used to be my home, staring at the blackened skeleton of twisted beams and melted siding. The smell of charred wood and burned plastic hung heavy in the air. My neighbor Jake had brought me coffee and a jacket, but I barely noticed the cold anymore. Everything felt numb. That's when I saw the white Escalade pulling into my driveway. My stomach dropped as I watched my mother Sandra emerge wearing designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She immediately pulled out her phone and started recording, speaking in that fake, cheerful voice she used for social media. "Good morning, everyone. So, my son Melvin's house burned down last night, and honestly, I'm not even surprised. This is what happens when you think you're better than your family." She panned the camera across the destruction like she was giving a house tour. "Look at all that fancy stuff he bought to show off. Where is it now?" My father, Robert, climbed out of the passenger side arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to hate over the years. He spotted Mrs. Henderson from next door and walked over to her. "We warned him this would happen," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Boy always thought he was too good for us. Karma has a way of humbling people." Mrs. Henderson looked horrified. "Robert, he lost everything. How can you say that about your own son?" "Some lessons can only be learned the hard way," he replied, shrugging like we were discussing the weather. My sister Ashley arrived 20 minutes later with her husband Derek. They climbed out of their minivan like they were arriving at a festival. Ashley wore a bright pink sweater and had her hair perfectly styled, clearly having taken time to get ready for this spectacle. "Oh my God, this is incredible," she squealed, pulling out her own phone. "Derek, get a picture of me by the ashes." Derek, ever the dutiful husband, started snapping photos while Ashley posed with exaggerated sad faces, then switched to smiling selfies. She was posting them in real time, and I could see her typing captions. "What are you writing?" Derek asked, looking over her shoulder. "When karma comes for the black sheep," she read aloud, giggling. "Do you think that's too mean?" "Nah, it's perfect," he replied. "Maybe add some fire emojis?" More neighbors had gathered by now, drawn by the commotion my family was creating. I saw them whispering to each other, shooting looks of disgust toward my parents. Mr. Walsh from 3 houses down shook his head and walked back inside, clearly unable to watch anymore. Sandra found my melted college diploma in what used to be my home office. The frame had warped and the glass was gone, but you could still make out the embossed seal from Penn State. "Look at this," she called out, holding it up like a trophy. "Mr. Engineering degree. All that money wasted on education, and what good did it do him? Should have learned a trade like his old man," Robert added. "College just filled his head with fancy ideas." Jake, who had been quietly supportive all morning, finally lost his temper. "What is wrong with you people? This is your son, your brother. How can you be celebrating this?" Sandra turned on him with venom in her voice. "Mind your own business. You don't know what it's like having a son who abandons his family the moment he gets a little success." "I've known Melvin since we were kids," Jake shot back. "He's never abandoned anyone. He's the most loyal person I know." "Loyal," Ashley laughed bitterly. He moved across town the second he could afford it. Never visits, never calls unless he needs something. That wasn't true, and everyone there knew it. I called my parents every Sunday. I invited them to every holiday, every birthday, every celebration. They were the ones who usually found excuses not to come. Derek walked over to where my outdoor grill had been now a twisted mess of metal and ceramic. "Hey, since everything's already pre-cooked here, maybe we should have a barbecue. Save some money on charcoal." The crowd of neighbors gasped. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived at the end of the street, actually covered her mouth in shock. "That's enough," Jake said, stepping toward Derek. "You need to leave, all of you." "We have every right to be here," Sandra snapped. "This is family business." Yo, Jake's voice cracked with emotion. "Family doesn't do this. Family doesn't take selfies at disaster sites. Family doesn't mock someone's pain." That's when Sandra made the move that would haunt me for months. She pulled up her phone and showed me the screen. It was a family group chat I'd been removed from months ago. The messages went back hours, starting from when I'd first called them about the fire. "Finally got what he deserved," from Ashley, sent at 3:15 in the morning. "Karma's a beautiful thing," from Robert at 3:20. "Should we pretend to be sad?" from Derek, followed by crying, laughing emojis. "I'm bringing my good camera," from Sandra. "This is going to make great content." There were dozens of messages, each one more cruel than the last. They'd been celebrating my misfortune for hours, planning this public humiliation, while I was still calling the Red Cross for emergency shelter. "You see," Sandra said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Everyone knows you had this coming. The whole family's been talking about when your perfect little life would finally fall apart." I stood up slowly, and my legs shaking with more than just exhaustion. The neighbors were watching, waiting to see how I'd respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell them exactly what I thought of their cruelty. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to list all the times I'd helped them, all the money I'd loaned them, all the holidays I'd hosted, when they were too proud to admit they couldn't afford it. Instead, I looked each of them in the eye one last time. Sandra with her phone still recording. Robert with his arms still crossed. Ashley still posing for more photos. Derek still grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd had in years. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked away, Jake hurrying to catch up with me. Behind us, I heard Sandra's voice calling out. "That's right. Walk away just like you always do when things get tough." But I wasn't walking away because things got tough. I was walking away because I finally understood who these people really were. And I was done pretending we were family. 3 days later, I sat in the cramped office of my insurance agent, Patricia Morrison. She was a kind woman in her 50s who'd handled my homeowner's policy for the past 4 years without any problems. But the expression on her face told me this meeting wasn't going to go as smoothly as I'd hoped. "Melvin, I have to be honest with you." She began shuffling through a thick folder on her desk. "Your claim is going to be delayed." My heart sank. Delayed. Why, the fire marshal already ruled it was electrical. The investigation is closed. Patricia looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her pen. "It's not about the cause of the fire. We've received some concerning reports that we're required to investigate before we can process any payout." "What kind of reports?" She opened her computer and clicked through several screens before turning the monitor toward me. "Someone has been calling our fraud hotline for the past 3 months, claiming you've been planning to burn down your house for the insurance money." I stared at the screen in disbelief. There were detailed notes about multiple calls, all from someone identifying herself as a concerned family member. "The caller said you'd been struggling financially and had been talking about how much money you'd get if something happened to your house," Patricia continued. "She provided specific details about your policy limits and claimed you'd been researching accelerants." "That's insane," I said, my voice rising. "I work as a mechanical engineer. I make good money. I wasn't struggling financially." "I believe you," Patricia said gently. "But we have to investigate." The caller also provided recordings. She clicked another icon, and suddenly I heard my mother's voice coming through the computer speakers. "This is Sandra Walsh calling about my son Melvin Walsh. Policy number." She rattled off my correct policy number. "I'm very worried about him. He's been acting strange lately, talking about money problems and how he wishes something would happen to that house so he could collect the insurance and start over." The recording continued for nearly 5 minutes. Sandra sounded genuinely concerned, like a worried mother doing her civic duty. She mentioned that I'd been acting desperate and had been researching fire insurance payouts online. She even claimed I'd asked her about the best ways to make a fire look accidental. Every word was a lie, but she delivered it with such conviction that I could understand why the insurance company had to take it seriously. "There are 4 more recordings," Patricia said, "each one more detailed than the last." I felt sick. While I'd been calling my parents every Sunday sharing updates about my job and my life, they'd been systematically destroying my reputation behind my back. After leaving the insurance office, I drove straight to my family's lawyer, Benjamin Carter. He'd been handling legal matters for the Walsh family for over 20 years, including the probate for my grandfather's estate 2 years earlier. Benjamin's office was in one of those old colonial buildings downtown with dark wood paneling and law books that looked like they hadn't been moved since the 1970s. He greeted me with a concerned expression that immediately put me on edge. "Melvin, I'm glad you came in. There are some things we need to discuss." He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his massive desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air. "Your parents came to see me 6 months ago," he began. "They wanted to contest your grandfather's inheritance." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My grandfather had left me $50,000 when he died, money I'd used as a down payment on my house. It was a generous gift, but not unreasonable, considering I was his only grandchild who'd graduated college. "Contested on what grounds?" Benjamin opened a file and pulled out several documents. "They claimed your grandfather was mentally incompetent when he made the will and that you had manipulated him into leaving you the money." "That's ridiculous. Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the day he died." "I know that. You know that. The problem is they had documentation to support their claim." He showed me copies of medical records I'd never seen before. According to these documents, my grandfather had been diagnosed with dementia 6 months before his death and had been declared mentally incompetent by a psychiatrist. "These are fake," I said immediately. "Grandpa was living independently, managing his own finances. He took me out to dinner 3 days before he died, and his mind was completely clear." "The records appear legitimate," Benjamin said carefully. "But that's not the strangest part. They withdrew the contest the day before your house burned down." The timing sent chills down my spine. "What changed their minds?" "According to your mother, they decided family harmony was more important than money." Benjamin's tone suggested he didn't believe that explanation any more than I did. He pulled out another set of documents. "But there's something else you should know. They've been spreading these stories about your grandfather's supposed dementia to other family members. Your Aunt Martha, your cousin David, even some of your grandfather's old friends." I thought about the strange looks I'd gotten at family gatherings over the past year, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. I'd assumed it was because of my success that they resented my career and education. Now I realized they'd been told I was a predator who'd taken advantage of a sick old man. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Because yesterday your mother called and asked me to prepare conservatorship papers." "Conservatorship? Send you. She wants to have you declared mentally incompetent so she can manage your affairs." He paused, letting that sink in. "She said the fire was clearly a result of your deteriorating mental state, and that the family needs to step in before you hurt yourself or others." The room seemed to spin around me. My own mother was trying to have me declared insane so she could control my money. "She mentioned that you've been seeing a psychiatrist," Benjamin continued. "I've never seen a psychiatrist in my life." "That's what I thought." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. But according to her, Dr. Harrison has been treating you for depression and suicidal ideation for the past year. The name meant nothing to me, but Benjamin was already dialing. Dr. Harrison's office, a receptionist answered. This is Benjamin Carter, attorney for the Walsh family. I need to verify treatment records for Melvin Walsh. There was a pause, then typing sounds. Yes, Mr. Walsh has been a patient for 14 months. Dr. Harrison has documented severe depression, paranoid ideation, and increasing financial stress. The doctor believes Mr. Walsh poses a danger to himself. Benjamin thanked her and hung up his face grave. Melvin, either you've been lying to me about your mental health or someone has been impersonating you for over a year. I stared at him in stunned silence. The scope of my family's betrayal was beyond anything I could have imagined. They hadn't just mocked my misfortune, they'd been systematically destroying my life from every possible angle. What do I do? I asked. First, we're going to get to the bottom of this Dr. Harrison situation. Then, we're going to find out exactly what your parents have been planning. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the street below. Melvin, I've known your family for decades. I watched you grow up. What they're doing isn't just cruel, it's criminal. As I left Benjamin's office, my phone rang. It was my sister Ashley. Melvin, where are you staying? Mom wants to know. Why does she want to know? She's worried about you. We all are. You didn't look good yesterday, and after everything that's happened, her voice trailed off with fake concern. I'm fine, Ashley. Are you, though? Because Mom said you've been seeing Dr. Harrison for depression. Maybe you should come stay with us for a while, just until you get back on your feet. The trap was closing around me, and my own family was pulling the strings. Thanks for the offer, but I'm managing fine on my own. Melvin, you don't have to be proud. Family takes care of family. The irony of those words coming from someone who'd spent yesterday taking selfies in my burned home was almost too much to bear. I'll talk to you later, Ashley. As I hung up, I realized that walking away from them at the fire scene hadn't been enough. They were still coming for me, still trying to destroy whatever pieces of my life remained. But now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I was going to fight back. I hired Marcus Rodriguez 2 days later. He was a private investigator. Jake had recommended a former police detective who specialized in fraud cases. His office was above a deli in downtown Chester, nothing fancy, but the walls were covered with certificates and commendations that spoke to his experience. Your family's been busy, Marcus said, spreading photographs across his desk like he was dealing cards. I've been digging into their activities for the past week, and what I found is disturbing. The first photo showed my mother sitting in a coffee shop with a woman I didn't recognize. According to Marcus, the woman was Dr. Evelyn Phillips, my supervisor's wife. Your mother's been meeting with her once a week for the past 2 months, Marcus explained. Mrs. Phillips has been feeding information to your mother about your job performance, your salary, even your vacation days. Why would she do that? Because your mother told her you've been borrowing money from your parents and they're concerned about your stability at work. She convinced Mrs. Phillips that they're trying to help you before you lose your job. The next photo showed my father talking to Father Mackenzie outside St. Andrew's Catholic Church, where I'd been attending Sunday services for 3 years. Your dad told the priest you've been stealing from the collection plate, Marcus continued. He provided specific dates and amounts, all fabricated. Father Mackenzie has been watching you during services, looking for signs of the theft your father described. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I'd been wondering why Father Mackenzie seemed cold toward me lately, why he'd stopped asking me to help with the church fundraisers. It gets worse, Marcus said, pulling out a thick folder. They've contacted your ex-girlfriend, Emma. Emma and I had dated for 2 years before breaking up amicably 6 months ago. She was a teacher at the local elementary school, one of the kindest people I'd ever known. They told her you'd become abusive toward the end of your relationship and that she should warn any mutual friends about your violent tendencies. Emma knows that's not true. We never even raised our voices at each other. She does know it's not true, which is why she called me after your mother contacted her. Emma's the one who suggested you might need to investigate your family. Marcus showed me phone records spanning 6 months. My parents had been calling everyone in my life, weaving a web of lies designed to isolate me completely. They'd contacted my coworkers, my neighbors, even my dentist. They've been building a narrative, Marcus explained. Mental instability, financial desperation, violent tendencies, substance abuse. Every story tailored to the specific person they were telling it to. The phone records also revealed something else. My parents had been intercepting my mail. They'd filed a change of address form redirecting my correspondence to their house. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance notices, everything had been going to them first. That's how they knew your policy limits, Marcus said. They've been reading your mail for months, learning every detail of your financial life. He pulled out bank statements I'd never seen before, showing withdrawals from accounts I'd never opened. They've been using your personal information to open credit cards and take out loans in your name. The debt is substantial. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. $15,000 in credit card debt. A personal loan for $8,000. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. They'd been systematically destroying my credit while building their case for my mental incompetence. How is this legal? It's not, Marcus said grimly. This is identity theft and fraud on a massive scale. But it gets even worse. He showed me recordings from his surveillance equipment. Ashley and Derek in their kitchen discussing their role in the scheme. Derek's been documenting everything for a potential lawsuit, Marcus explained. They're planning to claim you've been financially abusing your parents, forcing them to enable your gambling addiction. In the recording, Ashley's voice was clear and matter-of-fact. When this is over, we'll get the house and whatever's left of his savings. Derek's lawyer says we can claim emotional distress and get even more. Derek has a lawyer. Glenn Morrison specializes in family financial disputes. He's been advising them on the conservatorship process. Marcus pulled out the final piece of evidence, and this one nearly knocked me out of my chair. It was a psychiatric evaluation supposedly written by Dr. Harrison, recommending that I be committed to a mental health facility for observation. According to this report, you're a danger to yourself and others, Marcus read. You've been experiencing paranoid delusions, believing your family is conspiring against you. You've made threats of violence and shown signs of planning self-harm. The evaluation was detailed and professional, looking complete with psychological test scores and medication recommendations. If I hadn't known it was false, I might have believed it myself. Dr. Harrison doesn't exist, Marcus said. The medical license belongs to a psychiatrist who died 3 years ago in Florida. Someone's been using his credentials to create false medical records. Who? Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. That's where it gets interesting. The fake psychiatric reports are being generated by someone with access to legitimate medical software and database systems. He pulled out employment records showing that Derek worked as an IT administrator for a regional hospital system. Derek's been creating the false medical records from inside the hospital's computer system. He has access to patient databases, psychiatric evaluation templates, everything they need to make this look legitimate. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. My family hadn't just decided to mock my misfortune. They'd been planning to destroy my life completely for months, maybe longer. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his expression growing even more serious. I've been monitoring their communications and they're accelerating their timeline. He showed me text messages from the morning before. Sandra to Ashley. File the papers tomorrow. Benjamin's getting suspicious and Melvin's asking too many questions. Ashley's response. Derek says the medical records are ready. We can have him committed by Friday if we move fast. They're planning to have you involuntarily committed, Marcus explained. Once you're in psychiatric hold, they'll file for emergency conservatorship. By the time you get out, they'll control all your assets. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were trying to do. This wasn't just about money or jealousy. They were trying to steal my entire life. What do I do? Marcus gathered the evidence back into folders. We're going to turn the tables. They've committed multiple federal crimes and they've left a paper trail that leads directly back to them. He picked up his phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? The FBI. This kind of organized fraud and identity theft falls under federal jurisdiction. He paused as someone answered. Agent Jennifer Murphy, please. Tell her Marcus Rodriguez is calling about a major fraud case. As Marcus explained the situation to the FBI agent, I realized my family's cruelty was about to become their downfall. They'd been so confident in their superiority, so certain they could manipulate everyone around them, that they'd documented their own crimes in excruciating detail. In trying to destroy me, they were about to destroy themselves. But the biggest shock was still to come. Agent Jennifer Murphy arrived at Marcus's office the next morning with 2 other federal investigators and enough legal paperwork to bury my family's schemes forever. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crime and elder fraud. Mr. Walsh, your family's activities have triggered multiple federal investigations. She began spreading files across Marcus's conference table. The identity theft and mail fraud are just the beginning. The first revelation hit like a sledgehammer. Walsh Construction. My parents' family business had been systematically embezzling money from elderly clients for over 3 years. Sandra, as the office manager, had been manipulating invoices and stealing directly from customer payments. Robert, as the primary contractor, had been overcharging for materials and pocketing the difference. Your mother has stolen approximately $190,000 from clients over the past 3 years, Agent Murphy explained. Most of the victims are senior citizens who hired the company for home repairs and modifications. She showed me bank records revealing the true source of my family's recent wealth. Sandra's new Escalade, their kitchen renovation, Ashley's expensive jewelry, even Derek's motorcycle. Everything had been purchased with stolen money. The fake psychiatrist situation led us to a larger conspiracy, Agent Murphy continued. Dr. Harrison's stolen identity has been used to create false competency evaluations for dozens of elderly people across 3 states. The scope was staggering. Derek hadn't just been creating fake records for me, he'd been part of a guardianship fraud scheme that targeted vulnerable seniors. The false psychiatric evaluations were used to have elderly people declared incompetent, allowing court-appointed guardians to seize control of their assets. Your brother-in-law has been selling medical records and psychiatric evaluations to a network of corrupt guardians and lawyers, Agent Murphy explained. The estimated damages exceed $2 million. Marcus pulled out surveillance footage from the hospital where Derek worked. The videos showed him accessing patient databases after hours, printing psychiatric evaluation templates, and meeting with unknown individuals in the hospital parking garage. We've been tracking this network for 8 months, Agent Murphy said. Derek's involvement gave us the break we needed to identify the entire operation. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Murphy showed me financial records from my parents' business partner, Thomas Mitchell. He'd been completely unaware of the embezzlement scheme and was being set up as the fall guy. Your parents have been forging Thomas's signature on fraudulent contracts and billing statements, she explained. When the scheme collapsed, they planned to blame everything on him while claiming they were victims of his manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. Sandra had been creating fake invoices using Thomas's stolen signature stamp. Robert had been telling clients that Thomas was the one demanding inflated prices for materials. They'd even planted evidence in Thomas's office to support their planned deception. Thomas came forward last week after discovering irregularities in the company's accounts, Agent Murphy continued. He's been cooperating with our investigation. She showed me recordings from Thomas's phone conversations with my parents. In one particularly damning exchange, Sandra could be heard coaching him on what to tell investigators. Just stick to the story we discussed. Sandra's voice was clear on the recording. You were confused about the billing procedures. You trusted Derek to handle the computer systems. You had no idea what was really happening. But Sandra, I did know what was happening, Thomas replied. I've been asking questions for months. The clients have been calling me directly about overcharges. That's why we need to present a united front. Robert's voice joined the conversation. If we all tell the same story, this goes away quietly. What about Melvin? He's an engineer. If he looks at these numbers, he'll know something's wrong. Melvin won't be a problem, Sandra said with chilling confidence. By the time this investigation starts, he'll be in no position to cause trouble for anyone. The recording continued for 20 minutes, with my parents outlining their plan to frame Thomas while having me committed to prevent me from exposing their crimes. They'd calculated every angle, anticipated every threat to their scheme. Agent Murphy pulled out the most devastating piece of evidence, a detailed plan found on Derek's computer outlining the family's strategy for destroying my life. Phase 1. Establish mental instability through false psychiatric records and family testimony, she read from the document. Phase 2. Create financial desperation through identity theft and credit manipulation. Phase 3. Trigger crisis event to justify emergency intervention. Crisis event, I asked. They were planning to have you arrested, Marcus answered grimly. Derek had been preparing to plant stolen merchandise in your temporary housing and tip off the police. The plan was methodical and thorough. They'd researched state laws on involuntary commitment, studied the conservatorship process, even consulted with lawyers about asset seizure procedures. Every step had been calculated to ensure they could take control of my insurance payout and any remaining assets. Agent Murphy showed me communications between Ashley and Derek discussing their expected windfall. Once we get conservatorship, the insurance money comes to us, Ashley had written in a text message. Derek's lawyer says we can claim the house fire was caused by Melvin's mental state and sue for additional damages. Derek's response was equally cold. The psychiatric records will support negligence claims. We might get more from lawsuits than from the insurance. They'd been planning to sue me for causing my own house fire, using the false psychiatric records as evidence that my mental illness made me liable for the damages. But the final twist came when Agent Murphy revealed that Sandra and Robert had been planning to eliminate Derek as a witness once the scheme was complete. Your parents have been documenting Derek's computer activities, she explained, showing me hidden surveillance footage from inside Derek's home office. They planned to turn him in for the medical records fraud after securing the conservatorship. Sandra had been secretly recording Derek's admissions about creating fake psychiatric evaluations. Robert had been photographing evidence of Derek's involvement in the guardianship scheme. They'd planned to throw him under the bus to protect themselves from federal charges. Ashley doesn't know about this part of the plan, Agent Murphy added. Your parents were prepared to sacrifice their own son-in-law to avoid prosecution. The evidence painted a picture of a family so consumed by greed and cruelty that they'd turned on each other. My parents hadn't just betrayed me. They'd betrayed everyone, including their own daughter's husband. What happens now? I asked. Agent Murphy began packing the evidence back into boxes. Tomorrow morning we execute search warrants on all their properties. By tomorrow evening your parents, your sister, and Derek will be in federal custody. As I walked out of Marcus's office, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my family's love and respect, never realizing they were incapable of either emotion. They hadn't just mocked my misfortune. They'd been actively working to destroy me for years, but their own greed and hatred had created the evidence that would bring them down. In their desperation to hurt me, they documented every crime recorded, every conspiracy, and left a trail that led federal investigators directly to their door. The tables were about to turn in a way they never saw coming. The FBI raids began at 6 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in December. I watched from Marcus's surveillance van as federal agents surrounded my parents' house, Walsh Construction's office, and Derek and Ashley's home simultaneously. Agent Murphy had invited me to observe, understanding that I needed to see justice in action after months of psychological torture. At my parents' house, Sandra answered the door in her silk robe, coffee mug in hand, clearly expecting another ordinary day. Her face went white when she saw the badges and search warrants. Through the telephoto lens, I could see her mouth moving frantically, probably demanding to speak to their lawyer or claiming this was all a mistake. Robert appeared behind her, still in his pajamas, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and fear, as Agent Murphy explained that they were being arrested for federal fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. The handcuffs seemed to make the reality finally sink in. Across town, Derek's arrest was more dramatic. He tried to run when agents knocked on his door, sprinting through his backyard in his underwear before being tackled beside his neighbor's pool. Ashley's screams could be heard from inside the house as agents confiscated computers, phones, and boxes of documents. The search of Walsh Construction's office revealed the full extent of their embezzlement operation. Filing cabinets full of fraudulent invoices, altered contracts, and forged signatures. Sandra's computer contained spreadsheets tracking stolen money with notes about which elderly clients were easy targets and which ones might cause problems. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a document on Sandra's desk. It was a list of their elderly clients with notes beside each name. Mrs. Peterson, trust easily, no family nearby. Mr. Davies, poor eyesight won't notice billing errors. Mrs. Romano, early dementia confused about money. They'd been targeting the most vulnerable members of our community, people who'd trusted them to help maintain their homes and independence. Agent Murphy's radio crackled with updates from the other search locations. "We've got boxes of fake medical records at the Derek Walsh residence. Computer evidence shows systematic database intrusion dating back 2 years. At the hospital where Derek worked, IT security discovered he'd been accessing patient records for hundreds of people, stealing personal information that was sold to identity thieves across multiple states. His security badge had been used to enter restricted areas during off hours, and surveillance footage showed him printing medical forms and psychiatric evaluation templates. But the most damning evidence came from Sandra's home office. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet, agents found detailed plans for framing not just me, but Thomas as well. There were forged documents ready to be planted in Thomas's office, fake communications designed to implicate him in the embezzlement scheme, and a timeline for destroying evidence once I'd been committed and Thomas had been arrested. "Your mother is a very thorough criminal," Agent Murphy observed as we watched Sandra being loaded into the back of a federal transport vehicle. She documented everything, including her exit strategy. The exit strategy involved fleeing to Robert's sister's house in Nevada after liquidating their remaining assets. They'd already transferred money to offshore accounts and had plane tickets for the following week. If their plan had succeeded, they would have disappeared with my insurance money, leaving Thomas to face fraud charges and me locked in a psychiatric facility. Local news crews arrived as the arrests were being made. Reporter Amanda Foster from Channel 7 was getting footage of Sandra and Robert being perp-walked from their house, their heads covered with jackets as they were loaded into separate vehicles. This is Amanda Foster, reporting from Chester, where federal agents have arrested 4 family members in connection with a massive fraud and elder abuse scheme. Sources tell us the investigation began when one of the family members reported his relatives for attempting to frame him for arson and insurance fraud. Watching the news coverage felt surreal. For months, I'd felt powerless against their coordinated attack on my reputation and sanity. Now they were the ones being humiliated on television, their crimes exposed for the entire community to see. The arrests triggered an avalanche of additional complaints. Elderly clients who'd been afraid to speak up began calling the FBI with their own stories of overcharging and theft. Mrs. Peterson, an 83-year-old widow, tearfully told investigators how Sandra had convinced her to pay $15,000 for a bathroom renovation that should have cost $4,000. "She seemed so nice," Mrs. Peterson said in her statement. "She said her son had psychological problems and needed help, so I gave her extra money thinking it would help him get treatment. Now I find out she was stealing from me to pay for her own luxuries." Mr. Davies, a retired teacher with diabetes-related vision problems, had been charged $12,000 for a wheelchair ramp that local contractors estimated should have cost $3,000. Sandra had told him the high price was due to special medical-grade materials that were completely unnecessary. "I trusted them because they were a family business," Mr. Davies explained to investigators. "When you're disabled and elderly, you depend on people's honesty. They took advantage of my disability to steal my savings. The hospital where Derek worked launched its own internal investigation, discovering that patient data for over 2,000 people had been compromised. The false psychiatric evaluations he'd created had been used to have 17 elderly people declared incompetent across 3 states, resulting in the theft of over $800,000 in assets by corrupt guardians. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's chief of psychiatry, held a press conference expressing outrage at Derek's crimes. The abuse of psychiatric evaluation tools to exploit vulnerable seniors represents a betrayal of medical ethics that goes to the very core of our profession, Dr. Webb stated. We're working with federal authorities to identify every person who was harmed by these fraudulent documents. Thomas, meanwhile, had been completely exonerated and was working with the FBI to help victims recover their stolen money. The business would survive, but it would take years to rebuild the trust that my parents had destroyed. I feel terrible about what happened to you, Thomas told me when we met at Benjamin's office. I should have known something was wrong earlier. You couldn't have known, I replied. They were planning to frame you too. We were both their victims. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Emma, my ex-girlfriend. Melvin, I saw the news. I'm so sorry for what your family put you through. I want you to know that when your mother called me with those lies, I never believed her for a second. Thank you for calling, Marcus, I said. Your tip helped start this whole investigation. I've been telling everyone who'll listen that your family lied about you. The teachers at school, the parents, everyone in our social circle. I want to make sure your reputation is completely cleared. As the day progressed, my phone rang constantly with calls from neighbors, co-workers, and friends who'd heard the news. People who'd been told lies about my mental health, my finances. My character were calling to apologize and offer support. Father Mackenzie from St. Andrews called personally. Melvin, I owe you a profound apology. I should never have believed those accusations without speaking to you directly. You're welcome back in our community with open arms. My supervisor at the engineering firm, Dave Patterson, called to assure me that my job was secure and that Mrs. Phillips would be facing disciplinary action for her role in spreading false information. We've reviewed your work performance over the past year, Dave said. You've been exemplary as always. Your mother's claims about job problems were completely fabricated. But the most emotional call came from Jake, who'd stood by me throughout the entire ordeal. I'm proud of you for fighting back, he said. A lot of people would have just accepted the abuse and tried to move on. You made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. As I sat in my temporary apartment that evening, watching the news coverage of my family's arrests, I realized that their cruelty had ultimately been their undoing. Their hatred for my success, their jealousy of my independence, their need to control and manipulate had driven them to commit crimes that would put them in prison for years. They'd tried to destroy my life, but instead they'd destroyed their own. And justice was just getting started. The federal courthouse in Philadelphia was packed the morning Sandra and Robert's sentencing hearing began. 6 months of legal proceedings had laid bare the full scope of their crimes, and the community they'd victimized wanted to see justice served. I sat in the front row with Marcus and Benjamin watching as my parents were led into the courtroom in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Judge Williams, a stern woman in her 60s known for tough sentences in fraud cases, had reviewed thousands of pages of evidence. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Chen, had built an airtight case documenting every theft, every forged document, every lie my parents had told over 3 years of criminal activity. The Walsh family fraud scheme represents one of the most comprehensive and callous criminal conspiracies this court has seen, Judge Williams began. The defendants systematically targeted elderly and vulnerable members of their community, stealing not just money, but dignity and trust. The victim impact statements were devastating. Mrs. Peterson, now 84 and using a walker, slowly made her way to the podium with the help of her granddaughter. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge, she began, her voice shaky but determined. I'm here because what Sandra and Robert Walsh did to me and others like me was evil. They looked into my eyes, saw a lonely widow, and decided I was easy prey. She described how Sandra had befriended her, visiting regularly and earning her trust before gradually increasing the scope and cost of home repair projects. She told me her son was sick and needed help paying for treatment. I gave her extra money because I thought I was helping a mother in crisis. Finding out she was stealing from me to buy luxury items while lying about her son's condition, it broke something inside me that can't be fixed. Mr. Davies testified about the impact of their theft on his medical care. The $12,000 they'd stolen had been his fund for diabetes treatment and medications. I had to ration my insulin because of what they stole, he said, tears streaming down his face. I ended up in the emergency room twice because I couldn't afford my full medication dosage. They literally endangered my life for money. 17 other elderly victims gave similar testimony. Each story followed the same pattern. Sandra would establish trust and friendship, Robert would provide inflated estimates for necessary repairs, and Derek would create false documentation to justify the excessive charges. Mrs. Romano, 89 years old and suffering from early-stage dementia, had lost her entire life savings of $43,000 to their scheme. Her son Michael spoke on her behalf. "My mother worked as a seamstress for 60 years to save that money," he said. "She lived frugally her entire life, never taking vacations or buying luxuries because she wanted to maintain her independence in her old age. These people stole her dignity, along with her savings." When it was Sandra's turn to speak, she stood behind the defendant's table, looking nothing like the confident, cruel woman who'd mocked my tragedy. Prison had aged her dramatically. Her designer clothes had been replaced with an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, and her perfectly styled hair hung limp and gray. "Your Honor, I made mistakes," she began, but Judge Williams cut her off. "Mrs. Walsh, you didn't make mistakes. Mistakes are accidental. You planned, executed, and attempted to cover up a systematic campaign of theft and fraud that spanned years and victimized dozens of elderly people." Sandra's lawyer, David Morrison, attempted to argue for leniency based on her previously clean record and her role as a mother and grandmother. "My client was influenced by financial pressures and family dysfunction," he argued. "The scheme began small and escalated beyond her control." Prosecutor Chen stood up with a stack of evidence. "Your Honor, this was not a case of financial pressure or family dysfunction. The defendant was living a lifestyle of luxury funded entirely by stolen money, while simultaneously attempting to have her own son declared mentally incompetent to steal from him as well." She presented photos of Sandra's social media posts from the past 2 years, expensive vacations, designer handbags, jewelry worth thousands of dollars, all purchased with money stolen from elderly victims. The defendant posted pictures of herself wearing a $3,000 watch on the same day she overcharged Mrs. Peterson $800 for unnecessary electrical work. Chen continued, "This was not desperation. This was predatory greed." When Robert's turn came, he attempted to shift blame to Derek and even to me. "Your Honor, I was manipulated by my son-in-law's computer expertise and my son's mental health problems," he claimed. "I'm just a simple contractor who got in over his head." Judge Williams had clearly heard enough. "Mr. Walsh, the evidence shows you personally targeted elderly clients' inflated estimates and pocketed thousands of dollars in overcharges. Your attempts to blame others are as dishonest as your business practices." The evidence against Robert was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed him deliberately damaging clients' property to justify additional repair work. Recorded phone calls revealed him coaching Sandra on how to manipulate vulnerable elderly customers. Ashley's sentencing was equally emotional. She'd been offered a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Derek and providing evidence about the family's planning. Her cooperation had helped convict the others, but it couldn't erase her own role in the conspiracy. "I was caught up in my family's dysfunction," she sobbed at the podium. "I know that's not an excuse, but I was raised to think this behavior was normal." Her statement rang hollow considering the evidence of her enthusiastic participation. Text messages showed her celebrating each successful theft and planning how to spend the stolen money. Derek's sentencing was the most complex because his crimes extended beyond the family scheme. The medical records fraud and identity theft ring he'd been part of had victimized hundreds of people across multiple states. Mr. Walsh used his position of trust in the healthcare system to facilitate the systematic abuse of elderly patients, Judge Williams noted. His actions represent a betrayal of professional ethics that enabled a criminal network spanning 3 states. Derek's lawyer argued that he'd been coerced by my parents, but the evidence showed he'd been running his own parallel schemes for years before joining their family conspiracy. When the sentences were announced, the courtroom fell silent. Sandra received 8 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $190,000 plus interest and penalties. Robert received 6 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release and joint restitution responsibility. Ashley received 2 years in federal prison, which she'd already served during pretrial detention, plus 5 years supervised release and community service, working with elder abuse prevention programs. Derek received 12 years in federal prison for his role in both the family scheme and the broader medical records fraud conspiracy. Judge Williams addressed them all before court adjourned. Your crimes were not victimless financial improprieties. You targeted the most vulnerable members of your community and betrayed their trust for personal gain. The sentences reflect not just the financial damage you caused, but the human suffering that resulted from your choices. Outside the courthouse, I was approached by several reporters. Amanda Foster from Channel 7 asked how it felt to see justice served. It feels like the truth finally came out, I said. My family spent months trying to destroy my reputation and my life. Now everyone can see who they really are. Do you plan to reconcile with any of them after they serve their sentences? Us. I thought about Ashley, who had broken down during sentencing and apologized directly to me for the first time. I've forgiven them, I said carefully. But forgiveness doesn't mean putting myself back in a position to be hurt again. Some bridges burn too completely to ever be rebuilt. That evening, I visited Ashley at the county jail before her transfer to federal prison. She looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the woman who'd posed for selfies beside my burned house. I'm sorry, Melvin, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I appreciate that, I replied. But I need to understand why. Why were you all so determined to hurt me? She was quiet for a long time before answering. Because you succeeded, and we didn't. Because you went to college and got a good job and bought a nice house, and it made us feel like failures. Mom and Dad convinced us that you thought you were better than us. I never thought that. I invited you to every holiday, every celebration. I tried to include you in my life. I know that now, she said, tears falling freely. But back then your success felt like a judgment on our failures. It was easier to believe you were the problem than to admit we were jealous. Our conversation lasted an hour. Ashley explained how Sandra had gradually poisoned the family against me, turning my achievements into evidence of my arrogance and my generosity into proof of my condescension. She made us believe that bringing you down was justified, Ashley continued. That you deserved what happened because of how you'd treated us. How did I treat you badly? You didn't. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We invented reasons to justify our jealousy. As I left the jail, I realized that Ashley's apology, while genuine, couldn't undo the years of psychological damage her family had inflicted. Their jealousy had turned them into people capable of celebrating my suffering and planning my destruction. But seeing them in prison, facing the consequences of their choices, brought a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Justice had been served not just for me, but for every elderly victim they'd targeted, and every vulnerable person they'd exploited. The truth had finally won. 1 year after my house burned down, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden Lisa and I had planted together. The morning coffee smelled perfect. The newspaper was spread across the granite countertop I'd picked out myself, and everything felt exactly as it should. The new house was larger than my old one, built with the insurance money and designed to reflect the life I wanted rather than the one I'd lost. Lisa had helped me choose every detail, from the hardwood floors to the color of the shutters. It was a home filled with love and honesty, something my family had never understood. Lisa Martinez had entered my life 8 months earlier when she was assigned as the victim advocate for Mrs. Peterson and the other elderly clients my parents had defrauded. As a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases, she'd seen the worst of human nature, but she somehow maintained an optimism and kindness that drew me to her immediately. "Your family's victims aren't just recovering financially," she'd told me during one of our early meetings. "They're healing emotionally because they know justice was served. That's partially thanks to your courage in fighting back." Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values. Lisa had seen me at my lowest point when I was still dealing with the trauma of my family's betrayal, and she'd helped me understand that their cruelty reflected their character, not mine. "You spent your whole life trying to earn love from people who weren't capable of giving it," she'd observed during one of our long conversations. "That doesn't make you naive. It makes you hopeful. Don't let their failures kill that part of you." This morning was special because I'd been planning a proposal for weeks. The ring was hidden upstairs in my sock drawer, and I'd arranged for us to have dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first official date. But first I had other business to attend to. Thomas had called the night before to discuss our latest project, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting elderly people from construction fraud and financial abuse. We'd been working together for 6 months to establish the Elder Protection Initiative, using our shared experience with my parents' crimes to help other families. The state licensing board wants us to testify at hearings next month, Thomas explained when he arrived at my house. They're implementing new oversight requirements for contractors working with senior citizens. Our nonprofit had already helped identify 3 other fraudulent contractors in the region, and we'd worked with law enforcement to recover over $60,000 for victims. The work was emotionally challenging, but deeply satisfying. "Mrs. Peterson called yesterday," Thomas continued. "She wanted to thank you again for the security system we installed. She says she finally feels safe in her own home. The Elder Protection Initiative provided free home security assessments and installation for elderly fraud victims funded by donations and grants. Mrs. Peterson had been one of our first clients, and seeing her regain confidence and independence had been incredibly rewarding." My phone rang as Thomas and I were reviewing the week's schedule. The caller ID showed it was Ashley calling from the halfway house where she was completing her supervised release. "Hi, Melvin," she said, her voice tentative. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling." Ashley and I had been in limited contact since her release 6 months earlier. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office and attending weekly therapy sessions as part of her probation requirements. "Of course it's okay," I replied. "How are you doing?" "I'm learning," she said carefully. "Dr. Rodriguez says I'm making progress in understanding how our family dynamics were toxic. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime. Not to ask for anything, just to talk." Dr. Rodriguez was the therapist Ashley had been working with to address the psychological patterns that had enabled her participation in our parents' crimes. According to Ashley, the sessions were helping her understand how jealousy and resentment had poisoned her judgment for years. "I'd be willing to meet," I said, "but I want to be clear about my boundaries. I'm not ready to have you back in my life in any significant way." "I understand," she replied. "I just want the chance to show you that I'm different now, that I'm working to become the sister I should have been." After hanging up, Thomas and I discussed Ashley's progress. He'd been following her case as part of his work with victim recovery programs. "She seems genuinely committed to changing," he observed. "The counselors at the halfway house say she's been model participant in all the therapy programs." "I hope that's true," I replied. But I learned the hard way not to assume good intentions from family members. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Father Mackenzie at St. Andrew's Church. He'd been following my work with elder abuse prevention and wanted to discuss a partnership. "We've had several elderly parishioners who've been targeted by scammers," he explained. "Would you consider doing a presentation on fraud prevention?" The church had been one of the places where my reputation had been damaged by my parents' lies, so the invitation felt particularly meaningful. I agreed to speak the following Sunday about warning signs of elder fraud and resources for victims. As evening approached, Lisa arrived to get ready for our dinner. She was wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her smile lit up the entire kitchen. "You seem nervous," she observed, kissing me hello. "Everything okay. Just thinking about how much my life has changed in the past year," I replied, which was technically true. We drove to Chez Laurent, the French restaurant, where we'd had our first date. The maitre d' seated us at the same table, and Lisa commented on the coincidence. "It's not a coincidence," I admitted. "I requested this table." Over dinner, we talked about our work, our plans for the weekend, and the vacation we'd been planning for next month. Lisa had never been to Colorado, and I wanted to show her the mountains where I'd spent childhood summers with my grandfather. As the waiter brought our dessert, I felt my heart racing. The ring box felt enormous in my jacket pocket, and I was certain Lisa could hear my pulse hammering. "Lisa," I began, my voice slightly shaky. "This past year has been the most challenging and the most rewarding of my life." She reached across the table and took my hand, her expression growing serious. "When my family destroyed my life, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered," I continued. "But really, I lost everything that was holding me back from finding what actually mattered." I stood up and pulled out the ring box, dropping to one knee beside our table. The restaurant grew quiet as other diners realized what was happening. "You taught me what real love looks like," I said, opening the box to reveal the emerald ring I'd chosen because it matched her eyes. "You showed me that family is something you choose, not something you inherit. Will you marry me?" Lisa's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as I slipped the ring onto her finger. We were both crying and laughing, and for a moment the pain of the past year felt completely worth it, because it had led me to this moment, this woman, this life. 2 weeks later, as I was reviewing applications for our nonprofit's latest grant, I received a letter forwarded by Benjamin Carter. The return address showed it was from Robert at the federal prison in Pennsylvania, where he was serving his sentence. The letter was 3 pages long, written in my father's careful handwriting. Unlike Sandra, who continued to maintain her innocence and blame everyone else for her situation, Robert's letter expressed genuine remorse. "Monsieur," it began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am for what we did to you. I've had 2 years to think about our actions, and I finally understand how wrong we were." He went on to describe the therapy programs he'd been participating in, and his growing understanding of how jealousy and resentment had corrupted his judgment. "Your mother and I convinced ourselves that you thought you were better than us, but the truth is we felt inferior to you, and we blamed you for our feelings instead of addressing them honestly. You achieved what we never could, and instead of being proud, we let our insecurity turn into cruelty." The letter continued with specific apologies for the lies they'd spread, the schemes they'd planned, and the humiliation they'd caused me. "I know I can't undo the damage we caused, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of how you fought back, how you protected the elderly people we victimized, and how you've built a new life based on honesty and integrity. You're the man I should have raised you to be, despite our failures as parents." He ended with a request that surprised me. "I don't expect you to visit or even respond to this letter. I just hope that someday you might be able to remember the few good times we had when you were young before our jealousy poisoned everything. I love you, and I'm sorry." I read the letter twice, then called Lisa to discuss it. She listened thoughtfully as I read portions aloud. "How does it make you feel?" she asked. And I replied honestly. Sad that it took prison for him to understand what he'd done. Sad that we wasted so many years on anger and resentment when we could have been a real family. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for several days before writing a brief reply. I told Robert that I appreciated his apology and that I was glad he was getting help. I didn't promise forgiveness or reconciliation, but I didn't close the door completely either. "I hope you find peace," I wrote in closing. "And I hope that when you're released, you'll use your experience to help others avoid the mistakes our family made." The following Sunday, I gave my presentation at St. Andrew's Church. The sanctuary was packed with elderly parishioners and their adult children, all eager to learn about protecting themselves from fraud. My own parents stole nearly $200,000 from people just like you. I began, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the topic. They targeted kind, trusting people and exploited their vulnerability for personal gain. I spent 40 minutes explaining warning signs of construction fraud, financial manipulation, and identity theft. The questions from the audience were thoughtful and sometimes heartbreaking. "How do we know who to trust?" asked Mrs. Williams, an 87-year-old widow. "If we can't trust family businesses, who can? We trust." "You trust but verify," I replied. "Get multiple estimates, ask for references, check licensing and insurance, and never let anyone pressure you into making immediate decisions about major expenses." After the presentation, dozens of people approached me with their own stories of attempted fraud or successful scams. Father Mackenzie asked if I'd be willing to make the presentation a monthly event. "Our community needs this education," he said, "and they need to hear it from someone who understands both sides of the equation." That afternoon, Lisa and I walked through the neighborhood where my old house had stood. The lot had been cleared and sold to a young family who'd built a beautiful colonial with a large yard for their children. "Any regrets?" Lisa asked as we stood on the sidewalk where I'd watched my life burn down 15 months earlier. "About the house?" "No," I replied. "Everything good that I lost in that fire I've rebuilt better. Everything bad that I lost needed to go." We walked hand in hand through streets where neighbors now waved and smiled, where my reputation had been restored through truth rather than lies. The elderly clients my parents had victimized had become some of my strongest supporters, recommending our nonprofit to friends and praising my work in their community groups. As we returned to our car, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "The state approved our expansion grant. We can hire 2 more victim advocates and open an office in Lancaster County." The Elder Protection Initiative was growing beyond anything I'd imagined when we'd started it 6 months earlier. We now had partnerships with law enforcement, state regulators, and healthcare systems across 3 counties. The work was becoming my passion as much as my profession. That evening, as Lisa and I planned our wedding for the following spring, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. My family's cruelty had nearly destroyed me, but it had also forced me to discover my own strength and resilience. I'd learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that love had to be mutual to be meaningful, and that the family you choose can be more powerful than the family you're born into. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what's truly worth having. The fire that consumed my house had also burned away the illusions that kept me tied to people who'd never truly loved me. In rising from those ashes, I'd built a life based on genuine relationships, honest work, and moral purpose. My parents had tried to destroy me out of jealousy and spite. Instead, they'd freed me to become the person I was meant to be. And for that, in a strange way, I would always be grateful. As I write this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members or friends, even when it was painful? How did you find the courage to choose your own well-being over maintaining harmful relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in difficult circumstances. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose peace over family obligation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a path forward to something better. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives us is the courage to start over. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember that you deserve to be surrounded by people who genuinely love and support you.